Good evening, everybody. It's lovely to see you. Thank you very much to the History Society for inviting me here. It's good to see you, and thank you for coming. It reminds me of a story of a speaker at a business lunch, and he spoke for about an hour and a half, and at the end of it, he sat down to very muted, unenthusiastic applause. And he said to the gentleman on his right, he said, "I'm sorry about that. I didn't see that the talk went down very well." And he said, "Well, I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all. I just invited the person who invited you to speak in the first place." So any complaints to Nikki if you don't enjoy it? Just to say, this isn't me. This is Yolande Lyne-Stephens, and I'll talk a little bit about her as we go along. And any of you, I'm sure, have passed OLEM in the last couple of months will have seen the tower is completely enveloped in this rather impressive, if not beautiful, case of scaffolding. And it's because of the storm we had, which I think was a couple of years ago now, some stonework was dislodged and it fell into our little garden just off Hills Road. And the council went crazy about it, so they closed Hills Road within about an hour, and so ambulances had to be diverted all over the place. But in fact, quite a lot of stonework had corroded because, believe it or not, Gonville Place is one of the most polluted areas of the country because of the concentration of traffic. So all that stonework's being replaced right at the very, very top to the tune of £1 million, I think. So it's quite a lot for us to find. But it will be there probably to the end of the summer, and then it'll be revealed again. So, right, let me take the talk out. Let's hope this isn't a talk on basket weaving. This is actually the talk I intended to give. So, Yolande Lyne-Stephens and the creation of a Cambridge church. Let me begin by sharing with you some words of a one-time Cambridge resident and novelist E.M. Forster from his novel The Longest Journey, which was published in 1907, and I quote, "They waited for the other tram by the Roman Catholic Church, whose florid bulk was already receding into twilight. It is the first big building that the incoming visitor sees. 'Oh, here come the colleges,' cries the Protestant parent, and then learns that it was built by a papist who made a fortune out of movable eyes for dolls," and we will come back to that later. "Built out of dolls' eyes to contain idols. That, at all events, is the legend and the joke. It watches over the apostate city, taller by many a yard than anything within, and asserting, however wildly, that here is eternity, stability, and bubbles unbreakable upon a windless sea." Well, 2 years ago, the Church of Our Lady and the English Martyrs, or to give it its complete title upon completion, Our Lady of the Assumption and the English Martyrs, or OLEM for the purposes of this talk, was awarded Grade 1 status by Historic England. Sitting alongside the other 67 buildings with this status in Cambridge, OLEM is now recognised as a building of national significance, alongside the Cenotaph in Whitehall, Clifton Suspension Bridge, and even Blackpool Tower. Historic England gave the following as reasons for the Grade 1 designation, and I quote, "Architectural interest, as the work of Dunn and Hansom, a highly significant architectural partnership, noteworthy for their major contribution to the late 19th century architecture of Catholic Church in England. Then for the building's landmark quality, found in its prominent position in the streetscape and skyline of Cambridge. For the exceptional quality of its craftsmanship, architectural detail and building materials. As an encompassing architectural vision, rich in symbolism internally and externally. Then historic interest, as the physical legacy of the nationwide growth in the Catholic community during the 19th century, as a record of the changing attitudes towards Catholicism in the late 19th century, seen in the contrast between the elaborate public display of the building's clear Catholic identity and the prevailing hostility still evident locally at the time of its construction. And then, for the purposes of this talk, most significantly, an example of female architectural patronage, being an entire church and separately listed rectory produced for a single patron and completed in a single phase of work. And it's this last reason that I'd like to concentrate on this evening. So many of these large, imposing churches built in the middle of the 19th century were only possible because of the wealth of religious orders, principally the Benedictines, the Jesuits, the Dominicans, or through very wealthy male donors. And OLEM stands out among them, not just because the entire church, with all its fixtures and fittings, together with a large rectory adjoining it, was funded by a woman, but by a woman who was born into an impoverished family and who endured a painful and often dark childhood. But before we delve into the story, I think it would be worth our while to ask the obvious question. Why was it deemed important, indeed necessary, to build this church in the first place? Why OLEM? Well, in order to answer the question, we need to go all the way back to the 16th century. Bear with me for a few minutes. From the accession of Queen Elizabeth I in 1558 to 1791, Catholic worship in England was illegal, as was the building of Catholic churches. 200 years of repression reduced the Catholic population to a few thousand souls who held on to their faith. The Catholic Relief Act of 1791 was of profound importance, as it brought in its wake a huge revival of church building in villages, suburbs and cities, not just to serve members of the old Catholic families, but to accommodate converts and the thousands of mostly Irish immigrants who poured into England during the 19th century. And many of these churches were small and unremarkable, but there were also splendid ones, while the best, OLEM included, were magnificent. And it's interesting to note that these buildings had a number of restrictions placed on them. They were not legally entitled to have steeples or bells, a law that was kept in place until 1926. But what of Cambridge? Well, although Bishop, later Cardinal, later Saint John Fisher, whose image is to be found a number of times in stone and glass at OLEM, had been a fellow of Michael House, which was later to be subsumed into Trinity College, and sometime Chancellor of the University, the religious character of the city was better defined by a group of dons who used to meet at the White House Tavern to the west of King's Parade, which was demolished in 1870. The tavern, not King's Parade. And this group included William Tandell, Thomas Cranmer, Hugh Latimer, and Nicholas Ridley, nicknamed Little Germany, for their attraction to and promotion of the teachings of Martin Luther. Moving into the first half of the 19th century, Cambridge was staunchly Protestant. Despite the Catholic Emancipation Act of 1829, there were no English-born Catholics living in the city. The private chapel of the Huddlestons at Sawston Hall provided the only place of worship for Catholics. Irish families coming to work on the local farms had to walk a 14-mile round trip to attend Mass. As one commentator observed, Cambridge, both town and gown, had remained at the heartland of Protestant England. By the middle of the 19th century, which saw the restoration of the Catholic hierarchy, church construction continued apace, including in 1843 the opening of a small Catholic church situated very close to what is now OLEM and dedicated to St Andrew. It was in fact just down Union Road. It was designed very early on in his career by Augustus Welby Pugin, who later remarked that actually he didn't like what he designed. But soon it proved to be too small to cope with the growing congregation, including the slowly increasing numbers of university students from wealthy families. The interesting thing about the church was that when OLEM was built, this little church was dismantled brick by brick, put on a boat and taken up the river to St Ives, where it's now the Catholic Church in St Ives. The then parish priest, Canon Quinlivan, raised enough money to buy Wanstead House. Wanstead House, if you're coming up Hills Road going into town, is that rather lovely Regency house that Encore Management look after now, that's just before the Rectory. And in fact, the church still owns the house. And in fact, the church was sitting on what was called the Lensfield estate. And this was owned by the Duke of Norfolk. And so we still have connections with the Duke of Norfolk. He also paid for the Catholic Cathedral in Norwich. The new parish priest who was appointed was a visionary man. His name was Canon Christopher Scott. And he was determined to not only pay off the debt on the land, but build a cathedral-like church on it. But where would the vast amounts of money come from to build and furnish it? The generous benefactor was not to be found among the landed gentry or wealthy industrialists, but rather from a widow who lived a largely lonely existence in a mansion some 20 miles away from Cambridge. Yolande Lyne-Stephens, as she was to become, was born in 1812, not amid splendour and wealth, but in a narrow side street in a poor area of Paris. The city was still very much in turmoil following the revolution. Her father, Jean, was a dance teacher, while her mother had danced as a child and was determined that her daughter would take to the stage. So Yolande, or Pauline as she was known, was enrolled into the dance school of the Paris Opera. But her childhood in this environment was far from glamorous, and in many respects it was abusive. Yolande's domineering and ambitious mother, Madame Duvenet, has been described as venal, bossy, controlling and manipulative. There is also a much darker side here, as many mothers of these young dancers not only controlled their daughters' performances on stage, but also arranged for them to be made available to men. Madame Duvenet happily pimped Yolande out to men for her own financial gain. So Yolande, who assumed the stage name Pauline, quickly established herself as the company's most talented dancer and rising star. But the psychological damage wrought by her mother took its toll, and she flung herself into numerous unhappy affairs. She gave birth to 2 children following affairs with men. These children, as a matter of course, were given away. No surprise then to learn that Yolande made 2 attempts to end her life. Miraculously, Yolande regained control of her career and began to perform regularly with the company in London, to the delight of Queen Victoria, who made it known that Yolande was her favourite ballerina. On the 13th of April 1834, Yolande gave her benefit performance in the King's Theatre, London. The occasion was a huge success, the Times commenting, "The house seemed as full as it could be, a brilliant as well as a crowded one. Pauline Duvenet's rise in general estimation has been rapidly accelerated in this and the past season, yet it rests evidently on the most secure basis, that of pleasing, unaffected manners in addition to real merit." Jennifer Roberts, in her fascinating account of Yolande's life called The Beauty of Her Age, goes on to describe the following scene at the same event. As Yolande acknowledged the applause from the audience, she may have seen, sitting alongside in a private box close to the stage, a small man of unremarkable appearance, leaning forward in his seat and gazing intently in her direction. he was the curiously named Stephen Lyne-Stephens. He was 35 years old and heir to one of the largest non-aristocratic fortunes in the country. Stephen Lyne-Stephens had inherited his father's enormous wealth, made largely through a highly successful trading enterprise with Portugal. Now, I said just at the beginning when I quoted E.M. Forster that there's a long story associated with OLEM, that it was built on the proceeds of moving doll's eyes, that Stephen Lyne-Stephens had invented moving doll's eyes. It's a nice story, but it's completely untrue. Because, in fact, when OLEM was being built, it was being knocked down by Protestant objectors who could not cope with a Catholic church being built. So they had to hire security guards. And it was called the Doll's Church because of the carved image of Mary, the Mother of God, that was being put into the church. And so they described it as the doll. So they called it the Doll's House. So that's where the story comes from, I think. Yolande retired from the stage unexpectedly in 1837. The couple courted for many years, not marrying until 1845, and although there were no children in the marriage, they remained in a happy union until his premature death in 1860. His death was a great blow to Yolande. As Jennifer Roberts comments, she ordered elaborate mourning dresses of rich, jet black silk, and during the next 3 weeks the servants watched her small, black-clad figure as she took slow, solitary walks around the lake at the back of the house. Now Stephens was gone, she was alone in a society which had little respect for her, which looked down on her, not only as a woman with a sexual history, but also as a French woman and a Catholic. Having inherited her husband's enormous wealth, including 3 large houses in Paris, London, and Linford Hall estate in Norfolk, which some of you may know because it's now a hotel, she quickly developed a reputation for great generosity. The tenants of the Linford estate, who largely knew nothing of her earthly life, would be visited by her at Christmas, where she would give presents to every home on the estate. As Yolande grew older, so her Catholic faith was rekindled, largely due to a friendship with Mother Digby, a French nun who became superior of a community in Roehampton. In the years following this, Yolande's generosity led her to fund the building of several churches, including £500,000, think how much that was in 1860, to fund a new church in Wellingborough, a new house for the Bishop of Northampton, and the St Francis Home for Boys in Northampton. During the winter of 1883, Canon Christopher Scott visited Yolande at Linford to tell her of the land still lying vacant and the church he longed to build there. Yolande received another visitor that winter, one with a towering, formidable intellect, one of the greatest literary and theological figures England has ever produced, John Henry Newman. Clearly, Newman had a huge influence on Yolande's momentous decision. For a month later, on the 15th of August, the date is highly significant, 1884, the feast of the Assumption, she made the journey from London to Cambridge, taking with her a bouquet of flowers from her garden to lay on the altar of the little Catholic church of St Andrew. Turning to Canon Scott, she asked him, "Will you allow me to build your church?" Yolande had decided to fund the entire cost of the church and the rectory, its design, its construction, the furnishings, the fixtures and fittings, together with all the silver and gold, liturgical plate and rich vestments. As she wrote to a friend, "I must be allowed to indulge my own taste and fancy, for I think it would not do building a church there which could not be worthy of its surroundings." The church would be dedicated to Our Lady of the Assumption, the feast day on which she made her offer. In addition, as secondary patrons of the church, she and Canon Scott chose the English Catholic martyrs, including, of course, John Fisher, who died for the faith in the 16th century. Dunn and Hanson architects designed the church in the style of the Gothic revival, and the builders were the Cambridge firm of Ratty and Kett. The finest ecclesiastical artists and craftsmen were chosen to produce the carvings, the sculptures, and the beautiful stained glass windows. Simon, if we could have the next slide. You'll see the church here under construction. Interesting to note that there were wrought iron gates all the way around the church. There's now a church wall, and they were taken down when the war occurred. But you can see what a huge footprint and how extraordinary it must have been to people who lived in Cambridge to suddenly see this huge building rising up. And for those of you who like facts and figures, the nave is 156 feet long, it's 71 feet wide, and the tower of the spire is over 213 feet. I've never been up to the top because I can barely go onto the first floor of a house without feeling vertigo. But if you go to the top, I'm told on a clear day you can see Ely Cathedral very clearly from the top. And of course, this church needed an organ. So Charles Villiers Stanford, Professor of Music at the University and the Royal College of Music, organist of Trinity College, was invited to design a splendid organ for the church. He lived actually immediately opposite in Harvey Road. And he went up to see a new organ in Armley in Leeds. And there was two men working on that for an Austrian firm. They were Englishmen called Abbott and Smith, which sounds like a firm of Dorset solicitors, I always think. But Abbott and Smith founded their own organ company. He said to them, "Would you build me an organ for this new church?" And Stanford gave the opening recital in 1890. Unfortunately, due to an incendiary device on the sacristy, which you can't just see, it's just about here, the sacristy went up in flames, and so much of the archive went with it. So we don't actually know what he played, but it's interesting that he wrote a huge amount of organ music at the end of sort of 1870s, beginning to 80s and 90s. So presumably he must have given the first performance of something in the church. And interesting enough, when the new organ case was erected, Yolande, who made regular visits to see the church, came in and she looked up and she said, "I don't actually like it." She said, "I'd like to have it changed." Well, you can imagine what the builders must have done. And Canon Scott said, "Well, it's going to cost a fortune." So out came the checkbook. And she said, I will pay for it. And she paid for it. Her new church was to have the best. So in the summer of 1888, Yolande fell seriously ill in Paris, just when Canon Scott was due to sign another contract for further work on the structure. How would this be paid unless Yolande had made provision in her will? Thankfully, Yolande recovered, and one of her first acts was to travel to Cambridge. When she met Canon Scott, Simon, could we go back to the picture of Yolande? When she met Canon Scott, she unclasped a magnificent pearl necklace worth many thousands of pounds from around her neck and placed it in his hands. Writing a few years later, Canon Scott remarked, "Her great gift to Cambridge was not merely an easy one of superfluous wealth, but it involved personal sacrifice. Friends of late had missed the sight of costly jewels, which for years had formed part of her personal adornment. What had become of a necklace of rarest pearls, now no longer worn? They had been sacrificed for the erection of this very church. And OLEM still has the necklace, although it's safely in a bank vault, I have to say. Actually, if we could go back to thank you. In addition, the church owns a large piece of ecclesiastical impedimenta called a monstrance, which is used for a service called benediction. It's very, very tall, very, very heavy, very ornate, original to the church. When it was commissioned, she asked for her engagement ring to to be placed in this monstrance. In fact, I saw it the other day when it was taken out. It's a very beautiful ring just at the bottom. So on the 9th of October, 1890, the Church of Our Lady of the Assumption and the English Martyrs was consecrated. The opening service took place on the 15th of October. If we could have the next slide. Here's a ticket for the opening. Admit to Pontifical High Mass at 11 o'clock. I rather like this. Porch. So some people are actually sitting in the porch. The entire Catholic hierarchy were in attendance, except the Archbishop of Westminster, who was too unwell to make the journey. The music for the Mass was performed by the choir of the Brompton Oratory, alongside large numbers of clergy and dignitaries, including the Duke of Norfolk. If we could go to the next one, Simon. This is the completed church. One thing of note, if you look at the tower, you look at the spire, the tower, just underneath it where the bells would hang, you can see the other side. You can see absolutely right the way through. Whereas now they've been covered up, and I'm not sure when it was done, but there were so many complaints about the volume of the bells that they had to be covered up. And you probably would believe that the parish priest receives regular complaints about the bells being rung, mostly, I have to say, from students who live along Lensfield Road, who says it disturbs their study, can you believe? So they actually write letters saying, please, would you stop ringing the bells? So he got the Environmental Health Department down, and they did a test, and they said it's perfectly fine. You can ring your bells. So that was a relief. So at this opening Mass, one observer noted a frail little figure in black in the front pew, accompanied by her maid. And there's a story at the opening service. Yolande was sitting at the front row, and it came to the collection, and a steward came round with a bowl and put it in front of her. And she said, "No, dear, I think I've given enough." To all accounts, she sat there, lost in contemplation, with bowed head, and the thought, "You have done so much and I won't disturb you," crossed this steward's mind. If we could go to the next slide. Now, this is an interesting photograph. This is when the church was actually consecrated, not open, but consecrated. And what happens at a consecration is the bishop will anoint the walls, particular parts of the church, with holy oil. But this was the old rite. It doesn't happen now, but this cross it was made out of charcoal. And it was a form of tracing a cross, again, another mark of saying this building will now be made holy, it'll be made separate for holy things. And so this great cross, which means that's why you don't have a congregation there. It's right in the middle. Those of you who know OLEM will also notice there's something missing, as well as the chairs, because now there is a large rood, what we call a rood, which is a big crucifix with the figures of Mary and St. John the other side. This is in fact a later addition. It was quite late actually. It was put in the early 50s. But it gives you some idea of how large the church was. And I think it's worth saying the church was built for a congregation of 30. Just 30 people. The idea was it was going to be the Catholic chaplaincy for the university. But that didn't actually happen. And interestingly enough, if you go into the Rectory, if you're able one day come into the Rectory, I can show anybody who'd like to see it. It's set out almost like a college. So you've got a very large dining room with a huge table that sits about 20. And the portrait of Yolande sits over the fireplace. And then there are two interconnecting doors into a huge drawing room. So it's like a senior common room. And she had this idea that there would be clergy who would be like fellows and dons. And they would have their meals and then they would go into the senior common room. That was her idea. But now the congregation is a little bit bigger than 30, one has to say. Yolande died on the 2nd of September 1894. On the 6th of September, she was received by Canon Scott into the church that was to be the crowning achievement of her life. During the night, 4 nuns kept vigil over her coffin, while the following morning a requiem mass was offered by the Bishop of Northampton. Canon Scott chose as his text a verse from the letter to the Hebrews. God is not unjust that he should forget your work and the love that you have shown in his name. Canon Scott continued, the departed benefactress, whose remains now lie before the altar, has claims upon us why she should be remembered. We have towards her a debt of gratitude for deeds on account of which she will not, we trust, be forgotten by God, into whose presence she has been called. Richly had she been endowed with gifts of every kind, of natural character, of special intelligence, of winning attractiveness, which compelled homage from all who came under her charm. Well, what of OLEM today, just to wrap up? If we could go to the next slide, Simon. This is a little quick, brief tour. One of the features of the church, for those who know the church very well, is the quality of the glass. It really is the highest quality. I mean, everything in the building is of highest quality, but certainly the glass is. And it's one of the few Catholic churches where there's an image of Henry VIII. There is what we call the Fisher Aisle, which is on the south aisle, and it's basically a story of John Fisher's life from really when he decided to stand up for his faith and to stand against Henry VIII when it came to the divorce and the separation from the Pope and the Catholic Church. And so there's a story of John Fisher, and there is a picture, an image of Henry VIII, which is a superb image, I have to say. It is. He looks a rather happy man, Henry VIII, but it's a lovely picture. But the glass is really worth looking for. And then the next one. Now, this gives you some idea of the magnificence of the church, really. It's a bit of an optical illusion, you know. You look at it outside and you think it's absolutely massive, but actually inside it seems sometimes a bit smaller due to the arches. It's a wonderful building in as much as it doesn't feel cavernous inside, but there's a certain intimacy, but yet when it's full, it feels very, very grand. This is what I was describing at the top, this, well, they call it a magistus, really, and that was put in the 50s. You'll see behind it is a doom painting, which is always very glorious as well. That was put in later. And the French glass, this is particularly beautiful, the French glass here. But everything you see the angels and the carvings. It was everything she wanted. It's exactly how she wanted it. And then the next slide. Here we go. This is my patch. This is where I spend my time. This is the second organ case, the organ itself. And again, you see all this ornate stonework. Now, interestingly enough, Yolande felt that her church should be as glorious as anything that was in Cambridge. And if you look at the top of the case, you'll see two trumpets. And angels are blowing the trumpets. And where else in Cambridge do you find two angels with trumpets on the top of an organ case? And that was Yolande saying, if kings can have it, we'll have it as well. So there they sit rather gloriously. And then the next slide. Now, this gives you a good idea of the church alive, as it were, the church as in a building and the church as in people. This was taken at the Easter Vigil a few years ago. And you can see what a wonderful liturgical space it is, and how, actually, in this picture shows you how lofty the church is, how very tall it is. So it's now a very, very busy church with a weekly congregation of 2,500, made up of people of every age, and more nationalities, really, than we can count. But like so many churches, it often speaks most powerfully when it's quiet and empty. A steady stream of people come through the doors every week, the devout and the agnostic, the thankful and the sorrowful, and those searching for answers that never really seem to come, who just watch and wait. And as they sit there, they may well marvel at the beauty that surrounds them, including the small, delicate flourishes in stone and glass of the people that helped the one-time ballerina make her vision a reality. If you look close enough, your next visit, you'll see immortalized in stone the heads of the builders, Ratty and Kett, Canon Christopher Scott, Cardinal, now St. John Henry Newman. And if you come into the porch from Hills Road on the north side, you'll see the two doors that will take you into the church. Just on the right is the door to the belfry, and just above the belfry door is the head of Yolande. And she's smiling. She's almost saying, welcome to my place. One Cambridge blogger wrote this recently. For those who share this writer's journey to work, stomping from Cambridge train station into the city centre, you will pass this magnificent structure of Gothic architecture residing on the busy junction of Regent Street and Hills Road. This might be one of the few places in the UK where waiting at a traffic light stop is a true delight, as it allows you the opportunity to appreciate such a beautiful monument. And then the last couple of slides. This is a lovely picture which was taken by the newspaper a couple of years ago. Again, it's a wonderful picture of the spire. Looking forward to seeing that again. And then the next one, we just had our website updated. We had a drone, and the drone's taken some lovely pictures, but this is a particularly good one, apart from the building on the left. This is rather a nice one. And then finally, I think this is the great view. This is a lovely one from Downing College as the mist is settling. So the next time you pass the north side of the church on Hills Road, look up and see the rose window. And Yolande asked specifically for this window to be created because every saint in this window is a female saint. And although blackened with the years of pollution, you'll be able to make out some writing on the wall, which reads, "Pray for the good estate of Yolande Lyne-Stephens, foundress of this church." Thanks very much. Thank you. It's a lot. It's interesting. We have quite a few concerts in the church now, and one lady came up to me the other week. She said, "I've lived in Cambridge for 33 years and I've never been through the doors." And I suppose if you're passing in a car, you can't just park. I mean, you have to actually physically want to walk inside, but it's open every day, so anybody's welcome to come and have a look.
Are there any questions? Yes. Thank you, Nigel. I really thought that was great.
Thank you.
I was one of the people who believed the idol.
They are doing well.
Can I ask you if you know anything about a wooden Madonna and Child?
Oh, yes.
Which is believed to come from Emmanuel?
Yes, that's right. It's at the back of the church, in what we call, I suppose you call it the antechapel. I suppose the antechurch, really, at the back. And it's said that this came from Emmanuel College, which was, of course, the home at the time of the Dominicans in Cambridge. And it's a very, very beautiful statue. I suppose one of the most important items in OLEM at the back. It's a very beautiful carved statue. Yeah.
It just looks rather late. I mean,
It looks like. Yeah. It's difficult to tell. That's the story behind it, anyway. Yeah.
As you say, one of the nicest figures.
It's one of the nicest figures, apart from the organ. Yes.
Do you know if it was deliberately designed to be the tallest building in Cambridge at the time?
I don't know, actually. It could. I mean, this idea of Yolande wanted it to be bigger and better than anything else.
Because I only asked
because
we are volunteers at the All Saints Church.
Right? Yes.
Lane,
Yes.
which was
Wonderful church.
when
Wonderful
it was
church.
built,
Yeah.
the tallest building.
Yeah.
But not for long.
Not for long. No.
What happened to the rule about nothing could be bought taller than King's College? That obviously.
That's it. Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah.
This is totally an aside, but Ket, his house, he was apart from being a critical figure in architecture in this town, he was mayor I think a couple of years.
Oh, was he? I didn't know that.
He's on Brooklands Avenue with
Ah.
very interesting woodwork inside. But and my garden is in the street off Brooklands Avenue, and there are pieces of stone. And in my neighbour's garden and in a neighbour's garden on Brooklands Avenue, she has a whole stone arch, but there are pieces of carved stone which clearly fell off the back of the Catholic Church
Oh, gosh. Wow. I'm not sure if I should tell my boss about that. I mean, let's hire a van and we'll come round. That's fascinating. Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. That is a fascinating.
I mean, it's just very interesting.
Yeah.
We have a shed at the bottom of, I mean, the house isn't
Yeah,
1937.
yeah.
We have a shed at the bottom of the garden, which is stone built, and Cambridge is, of course, brick built.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Yeah, thank you for that. I didn't know that Kep was the mayor.
Yes, a couple of times.
Yeah, fascinating. Oh,
You said it was an incendiary device which destroyed
Yep.
some archival material.
Yep.
Was that at wartime?
Yes, that was in the
Was
wartime.
shells destroyed?
Yes, it was basically the sacristy, what we call a vestry. The sacristy was destroyed, and you can still see the pothole marks on the wall. But it created a big fire. It was put out, thankfully, but all the original documents went up in flames. So it could have been a lot worse. Yeah.
Yes. You said already that you wondered why Cambridge is a city, because you thought it was the cathedral. You thought that was a cathedral. So why is it a city?
Well, yes, I'll just say something about that because many people think it is a cathedral. In fact, it was going to be the cathedral because, in fact, at the time when the church was built, we were part of the Catholic Church was part of the Diocese of Northampton. The Diocese of Northampton stretched from Northampton to Great Yarmouth. I mean, it was just a huge volume of land. And this was proposed to be Cambridge Cathedral. But then the Duke of Norfolk bought the land in Norwich and built what is now St John's Cathedral, which even then was a parish church and the largest parish church of any denomination in the country. So then in 1976, the Diocese of East Anglia was created. So Norwich became our cathedral. But it stuck. I mean, I heard somebody the other day standing outside the church saying, oh, here's the cathedral. I think it's because, it's just the sheer size of it and the magnificence of it makes people think it is a cathedral.
That has something to do with the
Yeah. I'm never sure about the city because Brighton is a city now and there's no cathedral. Yes, I think so. Yes. I think Brighton's a city now, is it? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I can't remember, I was reading about it the other day.
Yes.
It
Yes.
wasn't until 1950 something. 50,
Ah.
52.
Sure.
There is one of the points that you always see is the clock. Was that contemporary, the clock on the outside?
I think that was put on later. Actually, I think it was put on later. Yes. I should just say, because they'll get very angry with me if I don't mention the bell ringers. I get on really well. Not every organist gets on with bell ringers terribly well, but I do, and they're a really lovely team. And the bells, I'm told, are one of the finest rings in East Anglia, and they're all subscribed with saints' names. All of them have got saints' names all the way around them. And there's also in the clock itself an action which rings a particular tune, which goes to an Alleluia that we sing in church, and the clock actually mimics it. And so the problem is the mechanism has now dropped one note. So it just is left out, and which sounds a bit odd now, but that's why you'll hear this little tune on the hour being played. And it's all these little details that she wanted to be put in, yeah.
Thank you very much, that's very interesting.
Thank you.
I wanted to say how marvellous the acoustics are in the church.
Yes.
I went to hear Stola Cantorum.
Oh, great. Yep.
They were all round the outside.
That's it.
And it was just an amazing sound.
Yeah, it absolutely. I mean, it's a wonderful building to sing in. It's a very difficult building to speak in, but an easy building to sing in. It's got a wonderful, gentle acoustic to it, and thankfully, generations of clergy have not put carpet into the church, which deadens your acoustic. So, and because it's also very lofty. So, but it's a perfect place for concerts. It really is. It's a wonderful space for sacred music, really. Yeah.
Can I also ask where Yolande was buried?
She's buried in Roehampton at Strawberry Hill. That was where she lived. It's now the University of St Mary's Twickenham now, but she was buried. That's one of her many houses. Yeah.
Are there ever any guided tours?
No, not really. In fact, I spoke to the Cambridge tour guides a couple of months ago, and because they were saying so many people asked them about the church. So I think they're now thinking of, now they know about Yolande and the story, I think they're thinking about sending the guides in, I think, really. But, yeah.
And a lot of visitors, I mean, one overhears them.
Yes.
Think it is a college.
They do.
So
And yes, what surprised me, I still can't get my head around this, apparently it's the most photographed building in Cambridge. Now, you would say to yourself, no, it's got to be King's College, but I think what they mean by that is so many people who take photographs of kings can only take them from the outside because they think, well, I'm not paying the money to go inside. Whereas with OLEM, you can take photographs in and out. So, and also it's the first, as Forster said, it's the first big building you see as you come from the train station. So out come the cameras. Yeah.
So, when you go in, can you go up the spire?
I could probably make sure you go up the spire. I mean, the lantern tower in the middle. I mean, if you go up that, health and safety would close this. Probably shouldn't say there's probably this health and safety officer sitting in the audience, but it's all sort of, Heath Robinson ladders going up and down and sideways. But you can get as far, you can go up to where the bells are, then you can get a bit further. But it's pretty perilous, I have to say.
I think my days of steep.
Yeah.
Somebody, some Americans came to visit the other day and they said, oh, we can go up the
Yeah.
Grace and Mary's Tower, and I said, oh, you can't. Yeah.
Well, you may remember when in fact, I mean, you have seen him. There was a steeplejack who went right to the very, very top, to where the cross is at the. It's a sort of that kind of character, and he was an extraordinary man from a company in Wales that does this sort of thing. They go as high as they can on these things, and he'd been an insurance salesman, and he, can you believe it? And he changed his job when he was 70. He's now 77, and up he went. Fearless, absolutely fearless, and loved everything he does, loved it. And he goes around the country doing this, and he'll go up and then take shots for stonemasons. But he was an incredible man. He got right to the very, very top. I couldn't look, and I just couldn't look. It's just horrible.
My arms
Oh, sorry, right, okay. Oh, lovely. Thank you very much. That's very kind. Thank you. Thank you so much. That's really kind of. Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you. I love uncorking presents. It's very nice. That's great.